I
You'll find
completely
it.
agree though on your point on not falling in love with the technology. Like if you
Yeah.
look at me, you're like, oh, you scream UiPath, but I know, and I can say this publicly, it's totally fine. We're not we might be number one in market share, but we're not the only one out there. There's a ton of different technologies that can solve it.
But
And I
all the
like,
integrations that you have at
right.
UiPath, right? You naturally are going to learn
Yeah,
or
right.
interact with those technologies,
Right,
right?
exactly. And
So,
sometimes I figure out like, maybe we're not the best fit for that. And
mhm.
and I think, and I know I'm kind of just deviating a little bit, but I think there's merit in almost like not trying to pitch or sell or provide your service and actually
Yeah.
saying what's best for the customer, because I think relationship building is key. Hello and welcome to the I'm Breaking Into Tech. Oh, excuse me. Wow, messed that up right in the beginning, but that's totally okay. I'm Breaking Into Tech webinar series. I am your host, KJ, as part of the KJ's Corner, where my whole purpose here is to talk to technical people who have actual tech roles, whether that's pre-sales, whether that's post-sales, whether it's sales jobs, whatever the case may be, in a technical format, to hear their story and hear things about how they broke into tech so you can emulate that. And with me, as you can see, I have David Kroll, who is director of product marketing, which is awesome. And he's done that a few times, which we'll discuss here at Ashling Partners. So please, David, first off, how are you, man? How are things? I know we talked about it a little bit before, but how are things? What's going on?
I'm doing good, KJ, and I'm happy to be here and talk a little bit about my story and how I moved through different positions and where I started and where I ended up and all the different tug and pull to get there.
Awesome. Cool. So before we get into your story, so to speak, you do have a role right now with Ashling Partners. What is Ashling Partners? What do they do for the people who may not know?
Okay. So Ashling Partners is really an intelligent automation services provider that operates out of North America, but also has bases in India, Romania, and soon to be in Latin America as well.
Oh, wow. Cool.
So, yeah.
I didn't know about the Latin America thing. That's awesome. That's cool.
Yeah, but really, what we do is we come in and we help guide organizations through the intelligent automation philosophy, right? And make sure that we can land and have really good positive impact in those areas.
Sure, for sure. So you are, in summary, in short, Ashling's a services provider for everything intelligent automation.
You got it.
Cool. Awesome. So right now, product marketing. How'd you fall into that? What, what's that role entail? High level. I mean, obviously people understand what marketing is and they understand what a product is, but what's your specific, what would be kind of your day-to-day and what would you summarize as your roles and responsibilities?
That's a good question because product marketing is very wide. I mean, marketing in itself is a very wide blanket and product marketing kind of is a component of that. Some organizations, they put it, one under the other. At Ashton, we kind of put ours next to each other. So product marketing is really, it's a strategic focus where we're honing in on the different types of messaging, services offerings, and different capabilities. How do we message the different capabilities of what we do? Because we know we can do some incredible things and we can put together some great packages so that our customers and clients can come in and go, okay, this is what I need to be successful. These are the 3 things that I need, and connect them with the different consultants to drive those engagements. But we want to make it as easy as possible to understand that information because there's a lot of technical components that get discussed, right? And it's not an easy space to understand, especially if you're coming in new to it. So what I try to do is I try to simplify things. I try to make them easier to understand. I try to visualize a lot of words.
Sure. Yeah.
I build a lot of content over here. So things like brochures, presentations, that type of thing, trying to apply our brand and put our polish out there as well.
Cool. Awesome. So I think now with that, I want that to be kind of like the high level, like let's work back to that. Cause obviously you've had a pretty storied technical career. I'm looking at your LinkedIn right now. It looks like you started your professional career with SharePoint back in May 2008.
I did.
As an IT consultant. So as this is the first pilot episode that we have here, the way it's going to work is we're just going to let whoever the guest is explain their story. So I want to go back to 2008, May of 2008, a nice young, spry David Kroll at that point, back in the day. Yes. And kind of discuss that story and talk about what your roles were to that point. Almost, I don't want to treat it like a job interview. That's not the point here.
Sure.
But it would be really cool to see, because you've had some various different roles, from IT consultant to eventually becoming a systems analyst to rolling into pre-sales, getting that solution architect role, and then eventually the product marketing. So I'd love to hear just kind of however you would summarize that story, assuming you're sitting somewhere over drinks or sitting somewhere at a coffee, whatever it is. Just give us that story when you started as an IT consultant, and talk to us and get back to how you got to this product marketing role.
Sure. It's a long, complicated
Go for it, man.
So just
this is all about you.
Great. Well, I came right out of college, and I was so fortunate because I was able to secure an internship opportunity at a wonderful company called First Solar out of Northwest Ohio. I think it's the largest solar power manufacturer in the country. So it's a really great opportunity. I was really fortunate. I had a great boss when I came in, and she was the manager of rolling SharePoint out across that organization.
That tracks. Like looking for kids out of college being like, hey, do you want to help us stand up this SharePoint thing that we bought? Yep, that sounds about right.
Exactly. Yeah, SharePoint consultants back then were going for a very prime rate, as you can imagine.
Kind of like SAP consultants now. Yeah, I get it. Yep.
Yeah, but I mean, at the same time, it was a great opportunity for me going to college and getting my foot in the door. And once I got started building things in SharePoint, wrap my head around it, started to understand it, it wasn't much longer before people started to ask me to build applications for their different departments and their different groups. So this actually got me on the InfoPath train, which is going to date me. That's a Microsoft product, but
hey, it's you're dating yourself, not me. Like, what?
Yeah, well, I was always I would come in every day and I would work the support ticket queue. So I would come in and I would have 30, 40 tickets from all over the world to deal with, from Malaysia, Germany, you name it. And we would go in, we would tackle those support tickets, we would get through them. And I would be sitting there waiting for those tickets to come in. A lot of times. And as I got better, I got through the tickets faster. And so I had even more time. And so I started to apply my extra time to actually build out business applications. I didn't even really know what I was doing when I got into it. I didn't have like someone from the top telling me, here's the architectural process for doing all this. I was just trying to help people. And I was trying to build cool things because it was very interesting to me to learn how that technology worked. So during my internship, I actually built a shipping request system for the manufacturing team for domestic shipping. And it handled all sorts of things, all the way from environmental health and safety checks, and they could go in and sign off on it and say that they were shipping a hazardous material. I've actually used that build in hundreds of demos. Even going back to UiPath, I did a demonstration on a National Partners webinar that was based off a shipping request system that I created 10 years ago.
You did it a ton of time ago. I think we should dig into that a little bit. What was it that, obviously outside of your curiosity, which, hey, if people are listening, you're trying to break into tech, you've got to be curious and you got to do the work. That's first and foremost, I knew you would agree. What was it about during that time? What were you looking for that you were able to kind of connect the dots that there was a reason to build that application? Because I think sometimes I'll always advocate getting more technical, right? But this is a perfect opportunity where I would argue you're probably way more technical now than you were back then, right? And you kind of figured it out as you went along. So what was almost the key indicator, so to speak, that pushed you to building that app outside of this is annoying, I need to just make my life easier?
It was the departmental pain. I could feel it when I talked to the people. So I wasn't just going and let's go build an app and then trying to sell that app to a particular group. They were coming to me saying, we really need something. We're having a ton of trouble doing this shipping component. They were trying to force it all to happen within a SharePoint list, and they were running into all the struggles that would happen with that. And this list had thousands of items in it. So
and now I need to filter and I need to be able to, I got you.
So I saw the volume and I'm like, okay, maybe there's something I can do here. And it was fun. It started off as just kind of a couple simple basic forms, but I learned so much when I went through that project. I learned all the things you shouldn't do, all the things you should do. Let's start with the things I shouldn't do, right? Because when you come in, you don't have that architectural guidance or that technical architect that's helping guide you every step of the way, you're going to make a lot more mistakes.
I'm just thinking about my RPA workflows before what they are now. They were gross in comparison, but I got it to work. So I learned.
Well, I've seen your stuff, KJ, and I don't think it's that bad at all.
But you got to remember, right? You met me when I was a few years into UiPath with that training. When I started, I was just at an implementation, much like Ashling, right? Smaller boutique company. I didn't really have, just use that. I didn't have the training. I didn't have the discipline. So I learned what not to do. So when I went somewhere where I could operationalize that. Yeah. So
we actually went and delivered that shipping request application to the business. It was used for like 5 years.
wow.
And I'm pretty sure they kept using it after they left until eventually they rebuilt it using K2, which that gets me into my second pivot.
Yeah, go ahead. Keep going. What a perfect segue. It's like you're a sales engineer. Keep going, man. Go for it. Man.
Yeah. So while I was doing all this SharePoint work and while I was working in InfoPath, it became very clear and apparent to me that Microsoft wasn't going to invest any more money in InfoPath. Okay. This really culminated in a conference session that I went to. I went out to, I don't know if it was called Ignite at the time, but I went out to the SharePoint conference, the global SharePoint conference.
Let me look up what it's called now in the meantime. Keep going.
Yeah, but it was where Microsoft was going to announce their next big iteration of InfoPath. And the room was packed because there's so many people out there that built InfoPath applications. And they basically walked in and they said, we're not going to be making any changes to it.
Got it.
And that's kind of Microsoft's way of saying it's deprecated.
It's not driving revenue anymore. And I would assume probably at the time that's when Azure was starting to really pick up.
Yeah, Azure was picking up. Azure was picking up. And so it was very clear to me, and this is something that it's really important to hone in on or key into if you are in this field, is don't fall in love with just one technology. Make sure you keep your eyes open and your ears open to the different technology that's going on right now. Like, for example, there's been so much going on around generative AI and
tons.
That's
didn't you actually just speak about that like recently? Like, weren't you tied to something about that?
You know, it's funny. I've been actually working on some services offerings around that.
Oh, nice, good for you.
But yeah. Awesome. We'll see where that goes, but I haven't said anything publicly around it yet.
Fair enough. Maybe I'm putting the cart before the horse, or maybe.
No, you know what it is? It was it was how to use generative AI when you're building applications.
Yes, that's what I saw.
I think I used it for like helping me build regular expressions because
loves that's right. You talked about a post for how you could do it. Be like, give me this, and then all of a sudden it spits out this massive regular expression.
Right.
Yeah, I'm with you.
Right. Yep. And saves like, the 25 to 30 minutes of trying to do something like that.
What, going through Stack Overflow and trying to figure it out yourself? Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Got it.
More developers use that than
I completely agree though on your point on not falling in love with the technology. Like, if you look at me, you're like, oh, you scream UiPath, but I know, and I can say this publicly, it's totally fine. We're not we might be number one in market share, but we're not the only one out there. There's a ton of different technologies that can solve it.
But all the integrations that you have at UiPath, right? You naturally are going to learn to interact with those technologies.
Right, exactly. And sometimes I figure out like, maybe we're not the best fit for that. And I think, and I know I'm kind of just deviating a little bit, but I think there's merit in almost like not trying to pitch or sell or provide your service and actually saying what's best for the customer. Because I think relationship building is key. And what you talked about, and it's kind of what you did. Like, if we even think about your application, you building relationships with the business side and actually being like, what are your actual requirements? What do you need? And what's the impact of this? Builds a better,
getting the business on board and ensuring that everybody's in alignment is just such a key component to a successful development career. I mean, if you're always building in a vacuum and you're maybe only listening to like the senior developer on the team that's telling you how to build things, you're not going to do your best work. You're going to do your best work when you are connected to what the business needs you to build and you understand what it is that you're building. And that was something I think I just naturally did it. But I have found that with others I've come across in the career, when they really start to struggle, it's because there was a disconnect between them and the business, or maybe assumptions were made that shouldn't have been.
I think every single IT professional who's ever dealt with that would say the same.
Absolutely.
Like, oh yeah, there's a disconnect. Why did scope creep happen? Oh, well, I didn't get proper requirements from the business. And then I always push and say, well, what did you do to help that? What did you do to actually alleviate that? And that's where
you have to have grit. You have to have the hard work. Like, if you don't have the grit and you don't have that drive to uncover every rock and look under every stone while you're working with the business, and even when you're going out and investigating how to build something from a development standpoint, it is not going to be to your advantage, right? So definitely understand that going into any project, you probably don't know how to do it, and that's completely okay. it is something that as you go through it, you will figure out. You'll lean on your past experience. If you don't have past experience, I highly recommend you find a mentor, somebody that knows or has been through it before. There is no teacher like experience. There's no teacher like failure.
Yeah, for real. Yes, that is 100% true. If I look at my ISG career, like I was not a great RPA developer at the time. And they pretty much said, like, we can't help you. We're running too thin. And that moment told me, okay, if you really want to do this, you got to go find another avenue to do it. And then that's where I ended up falling into more of the pre-sales role, which is more up my alley. Now I'm sure, I could be like, hey, you need help with an implementation project. I can do it. But you're so right. The failure pushes you to where it does.
Well, and one thing, it's funny because when you look at someone's resume, you look at their LinkedIn or whatever, you'll be like, oh, they delivered all these applications. What you don't see is all the applications that didn't succeed. And that list is far bigger, right?
Yes, and I completely agree.
I'm comfortable admitting that. Not everyone is,
sure.
But it's a matter of, knowing that when you want to make sure that you're getting your ducks in a row on those smaller projects. If you get an opportunity to work on a smaller project that isn't as intense or doesn't have as much scrutiny on it, that is a great learning opportunity, because there's not that much different between building one of those smaller applications and building a larger, more mission critical application.
Love it.
Right? It's an area to practice. It's an area where you can go to the batting cages and just start swinging and see how far you can hit the ball. You can try new things. You can try to integrate or push the limit. You can promise certain things, because it's not going to have such an impact if it doesn't come through on the back end. Although I am a big fan of under promising and over delivering, which
well, that's just because you're a good person. I think that's so impactful and so true. And I think it's common sense, but I think sometimes, just like you said, we listen to the minutia. We're in a vacuum. We start to hear certain things and we're like, well, no, what actually makes sense to me, and what you're describing is exactly right. Like, let me work on this project because, one, I want to help myself selfishly, but then selflessly, right? How is this going to deliver impact? And especially if you can do it on the smaller scale, just like you said, there might be some more nuances. You might have a little more red tape, but is the process that much different? Not really. and that's what I think is key that you highlighted there. So we've talked a lot about kind of where you're the systems analyst, that's more kind of the technical specialist here to K2. And then I think by this point you started moving into more of the solutions architect or as technical specialist. But then eventually, for whatever reason, K2 said, hey man, you should come do product marketing for us. And this is the first time. So,
that's
talk
kind
about
of an
that.
interesting story. So I had actually learned K2. I had supported it for years back when I was at First Solar and had done some really good work with it. We had built a lot of applications in it. So again, this is that evolution of what we decided to use after InfoPath. So built a lot of cool solutions on it. And I had the opportunity to actually go to K2 and to work on their technical pre-sales team.
Oh, wow. Okay.
It was really an incredible opportunity for me. At the time, I was kind of just sitting in a cubicle, right? And I only have great things to say about that previous company, but it wasn't going to give me that world view or that the ability to travel and go different places and meet a bunch of different people. And what was so cool for me as a technologist at the time was, I had only ever worked with one style of application deployment, deployment philosophy behind development. And in my head, I was like, oh, this is the gold standard. Well, as I left and I started to meet with other potential clients, actual clients, I was realizing, wow, every environment is so different. And there's so many different ways to skin the cat, so to speak. And it was very, very interesting. I learned so much in those 3 to 4 years where I worked in technical pre-sales, because I was just thrown in to a new, it, right? Walk in the door and it's just like,
why do you think I'm sitting here? Like, it's the same thing. Like, learned, you're so right, but continue.
You learn you can handle anything. Yes. You learn that you can handle anything. There'll be people that are really difficult to persuade, and there are people that they meet you and they love you, right? And everything in between. And so you learn how to handle a lot of different types of personalities. You get really it helps you build your confidence. For me, I wasn't a very confident developer. I wasn't very confident until I delivered something that was completely polished and in my eyes perfect. And what I realized after doing technical pre-sales was that perfection was the enemy of good.
Oh,
right? You can easily spend way too much time formatting stuff.
Yeah, if you're perfecting it, I think there's something wrong with the pitch, to be completely candid with you.
Right. There's a backlog somewhere of other applications
right.
you should probably be building.
Right, exactly. Or it's maybe we're not growing at that point. Maybe it could be left alone. You don't need to handle that anymore. Let's move on being more creative. Exactly. Yeah.
You got it. But yes, so while I was at K2, and I was actually doing the technical pre-sales work, that's actually when I first met you.
Right. Oh, yep. Yeah. That was it Topgolf actually?
Yeah, there were so many people at that event. It
right.
was wonderful, wasn't it? So when I was at K2, I had the opportunity to help with demand generation. So one of the things they looked at me and they said, well, we see that you're building these demonstrations, and we like how you're articulating them. We like the work you've been doing. What do you think about taking that to the next level and starting to travel across the country and do different event speaking engagements? And I was like, well, that sounds really interesting, and it also sounds absolutely terrifying.
Sure.
What I've learned is that if you're scared of it, there's a skill to be learned.
Yeah,
if you're
absolutely.
scared of public speaking, it's because you haven't fully
been exposed to
that skill, right?
Right.
And I was scared to speak up in meetings when I was at my very first company, where there were directors and high-level managers in the room, and I was like, oh man, I was confident in my abilities, but I didn't want to speak out of turn. I didn't want to speak over someone. I knew there were political, aspects to
which happens at it's corporate America,
right.
I mean, or across the world, but yeah, I'd say corporate America is here in the States.
but
it's true.
Having the gall to stand up and strongly say something you believe in, that was definitely a skill I had to learn. And it took me a while to get it down. My very first demo when I was going through training was the worst demo I've ever given in my life.
Isn't it funny watching back old stuff and you're like, oh, it's so bad. And but even it landed, you know what I mean? It's like, okay, I did something right. Or
it's so funny because I found a couple of just incredible mentors while I was over there. People that were just very eloquent in their articulation of what we did. And I used to just listen to it. I know that might sound weird, but I would just put my headphones on and I would lay on the couch, and I wouldn't even watch the screen. I would just listen to their voices, because what I was trying to do was I was trying to learn their inflection, learn the way that they're going about it, because they would, I would communicate facts, but I wasn't getting as excited about it. Right. And what I learned was, you got to bring forward that excitement. We all have it. I'm not lying. I do believe in this product and I do believe in its capabilities, but you got to make sure when you're talking about it, that comes through, because if you leave it, it's a very monotone presentation. It's very boring, and people just, they check out.
It's nice too, because the more, and I don't know, I would say this to anyone, right? If you're getting involved with like technology is really the means to an end. It's nothing more than that. Yeah, some cool technologies are out there that are awesome and solve some really cool, like ChatGPT is a great one. Like the fact that you can throw something in there and get a prompt is great. But that technology exists in a bunch of stuff. So like being able to, and I think being like infectious in terms of like making it real for them. Is I think the key. And it literally becomes something more than like, as we're talking right now, if I was talking just like this, you'd be like, oh, whatever. But as I'm adding more, like it's so funny that you're bringing that up, because people will be like, that's just simple presentation. It's like, well, yeah, exactly. Like you just have to be able to build the acumen to, substantiate what you're saying. But I think that's more I don't want to say the easier part, but once you get that, then you can always back end it. And then just you're talking about, I would say, comparison to your first demo to, you're probably not doing much prep anymore on a demo now. And but that comes with experience and time and practice and so on and so on.
True.
You brought that up, and it's really cool that you're providing another avenue of like, how do I get better at presenting? Sometimes if you listen to how it's pitched, you can do that on your own.
You named it. So this aspect of continuous development and continuous learning, it's absolutely key. It's core to this whole role, this whole world. Is it, you can learn a ton in a year. You can also fall out very quickly of what if you're not paying attention.
So
you can become an expert, I found, in a year or two of dedicated focus towards a particular technology or particular space. But if you don't keep your ear to the ground, so to speak, and keep an eye on how things are developing, products, they change rapidly. The investors behind these companies, they do different things. They make big decisions and they move quickly. I mean, just look at what Microsoft's doing around the whole Copilot and generative AI space. The second ChatGPT kind of was being discussed in the media, they realized we're gonna become a big part of this.
Just got to lean into it. Yeah. And even adding on to that, like kind of looking at my lens and automation, we're following suit on that. Like people are looking more at that personal productivity. How do I get this in the hands of the people?
Yeah.
How do I, whatever. And you can see like when GPT was like, oh, we have plugins now. I'm like, that's automation. Like that's automation, right? Like, but you're so right is that like back to, I think the original point that you made, like don't sit in a vacuum, pay attention to other technologies and see how they're going to work together. And especially if you're going to work in pre-sales or more solution oriented, you've got to know how to solution that stuff. Now, granted,
I like to keep my own technology tier list, right? So
wow,
have you ever seen those like those video game tier lists? Or
yep, I know what you're talking about.
Like
yeah, so you have like S tier.
Yeah. So like S tier is like the best one, and then it goes all the way down.
Who's in S tier? Just thinking out loud. What would you consider S tier technologies? But it's going to be based on your lens, of course. But
absolutely. I mean, from my lens, you've got. It's tough, right? Because S tier is actually, in my eyes, it's what is focused on what is needed right now. It is the perfect placement for what is needed right now. And I would say, you look at companies like UiPath, you look at companies like Mercado, you look at companies like, I know, right?
You can strut myself all day, man. It works for me.
Yeah, absolutely. But like, I would say Celonis as well, and some of those other areas. I mean, depending on the particular technology and what they're going into, they're just a great fit. They're just the best you can have at that particular avenue when you need to make a decision. And so I definitely think those are I would say S tier.
No, and it's funny you mentioned those as like kind of S tier, not to like, but it's still right. Like if I look at those individually, like I look at UiPath, that's UI automation, that's the glue, that's the middleware, that's the gap. Workato, that's workflow automation, right? Like what's predefined, where is all your stuff, where does it come in? And then I look at Celonis as process mining, and process mining really is just going to map your backend to help you identify inefficiency. So if I'm thinking about digital transformation, which is kind of where our lens is in this conversation right now, if I can mine something and identify an opportunity, now someone like you can go in and say, hey, here's where your gaps are. And then you can look at both, even Workato, UiPath, or I'm not going to be ignorant to the fact that you got other RPA tools, right? But in short, right, you're now able to look at that and notice how all of these different technologies are helping people understand where their problems are and how you can solve them. And that's what I think is so cool about your tier right there, that you've looked at different technologies that solve different purposes for the same goal. And that's
one of my rules is if they're in the S tier, they have to play well with each other.
Yes. Yeah. Okay. I love that as a kind of thing. Yeah. And that's true. And there are some companies that kind of try and bully people out or try to say, no, we're the one, we're the one, which is fine. And I would argue that's a little bit more of a traditional approach in comparison. And like, there's always like, if you look at, I don't want to make this political, but there's always a rhyme or reason behind being more conservative about something versus being more progressive about something, whatever the case may be. And I think that mantra sometimes bubbles up into decisions that are made. I don't think there's necessarily a right or a wrong, but I fundamentally believe in kind of what you believe in, which is more like how open can we be with the technology, and don't make yourself better than you are. Like if I look at it at the most basic level, and I don't care if UiPath people hear this, we're the best middleware on the planet. Bar none. Like I would agree with that, and I'm sure you would probably agree with that to some respect as well. Like if I need to connect
my sheet here of what I'm allowed to say.
The sheet I didn't send you before. But true. Like, but if I look at technologies, right? Like, what do we do best? We're best in class user interface automation. So if I have a backend connection, okay, we can do it in UiPath. But if I don't have the backend, we fit right into that. And that's where like I love to live and breathe there and be the avenue and the catalyst to educating on everything else. And I'm sure that's what y'all do at Ashling all the time.
Yeah.
That's why you guys are a partner of ours. Like,
and I was gonna say, and a rapid comer that's probably gonna be S tier soon is probably gonna be Microsoft. I mean,
for sure.
I feel like Microsoft is just a consistent A tier in every category.
Absolutely.
They're just so big, right? And they have such a wide net. But I think as they start to get, more capable, and we see a lot of the generative AI capabilities added to the platform to improve productivity, I think it's going to become an obvious one for integration.
I agree with you. So. Yeah, and you're so spot on with like the generative AI, and I think it like scares people. But what I look at is kind of like where almost like look at like virtual reality versus augmented reality as like a comparison. I think people thought virtual reality was going to be the move. I actually think what it's going to become is kind of like a play toy for video games. Like I think that's going to be the next wave of it. Whereas kind of augmented reality is I think what's going to be the real kicker and the real beneficial thing. Like I saw some like little ad where like someone could pull up like a sneaker and like design it and customize it like from their phone. And I'm like, that's sick. And if I apply that to like the generative AI concept, it's not going to take away what you do. It's going to identify ways for you to be more efficient. And as you can learn how those technologies work, you're going to be able to customize that for yourself. And that's
a
the
really good
digital
point.
assistants that we're looking for, right? So
Yeah.
it's the same kind of concept. So yeah, right now, generative AI is talked about. There's a ton of FUD out there, right? What's the
Yeah,
reality?
absolutely.
I think the reality is it's always been around us. How you can prompt it, how you can leverage it is going to be there. Now, if your role is something that can be taken away from something like that, this is a perfect opportunity for you to say, all right, how do I upskill? Go learn how that stuff
Exactly.
works, right?
That
Yeah.
is a great point. I mean, just having the awareness and the identification of this is something that I need to uplift or I need to up level so that I can be relevant to the workforce, right? That's always going to be something that we're doing in the scope and realm of automation, right? I mean, if you look back to the original people calling each other on the telephone, there was, somebody plugging the wires, right?
Yeah.
Between the
Yeah.
different parties. And now that's all obviously completely
Right.
automatic.
And now I can be like, oh, hey, you want to FaceTime? Like and
Right.
it's crazy. Yeah. Which the Jetson put out years, like
Right.
decades ago. And people were like, is that going to be a thing? And now it's like, oh, this is normal. We're literally doing it right now.
Well,
Like,
technology will not stop just because you're scared
correct.
or upset.
Correct. Yes,
It's going to
exactly.
come. It's going to
Yeah.
happen.
And that's
Um,
where like and that's the big onus of this, right? Is like
mhm.
upskilling yourself and finding a way.
Great segue into the next point around like career movement, right?
Right.
Just
Exactly.
always trying to stay on top and learn new things. So uh, originally what happened was I was supposed to go to all those different conferences and do speaking engagements right before we
Yep.
pivoted into the fear of public speaking and overcoming
Sure.
that.
Yeah. Which, hey, it's a
Um,
podcast. What's supposed to be free form,
yeah.
open. Yeah, exactly. What happens?
What I realized was that's not what the business needed at the time. They ended up making some transition and changes, and I ended up getting put under the product marketing director.
Right.
And
Because
she
I saw
was
you move to that at K2. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. But she was brilliant. She had done really good work in the past, and I had an opportunity to learn from her, and that
Sure.
was just incredible. And so I spent about the next year helping where I could, but really trying to pay attention and hone in on how she was, applying her because she had actually been, believe it or not, a pre-sales engineer as well before she moved.
Man, we're everywhere, dude. Like, I didn't realize how many people were like sales engineers that I come into
Yeah,
contact with. I'm like, wow, okay, that's why you're able to present.
but it
That's
was
why
like
you're
it
able
was
to
all
speak
the
to it. Yeah.
things, it was all the things you would look for or what you need in like these leadership style positions or these strategic positions where you're
Right.
having to kind of do that deep thinking and plan ahead and make sure you get in front of the market. And I just learned so much from working with her and being on that team. And then when they were eventually acquired, I spent about 8 months or so dabbling a little bit in product compete.
Mhm.
And then I got the opportunity to work at Ashling, and I actually came back and did.
Because I was gonna ask you, yeah,
Yeah.
because I was gonna ask, like, did you get poached? Like, what happened? Like, what was the? Yeah, I mean,
Well,
I'll talk a little bit about career. So you were doing the product marketing role. What was it that Ashling offered you, or what was
yeah.
the opportunity that presented itself to go back into kind of being a solution architect? Which eventually now you're back in what you did before. But
Yeah,
what was
well,
it?
I think we all like to try to control our career destinies to
Sure.
some extent. And what I realized was that I really enjoyed building technical demonstrations, getting hands on with the technology, and I wanted to do a little bit more of that. And so I had an opportunity. I had met the co-founders of Ashling, Don and Marshall, years ago, back when I worked with K2,
Sure. That makes
and
sense.
had done some good webinars and events with them, and I really liked them, and I really liked
Of
their
course.
business model.
I do
And
too,
so,
candidly. Like, I really do. Like, I know I'm kind of like, drinking the Kool-Aid a little bit, but I actually agree with how they operate because they're actually customer focused, which I really appreciate about them.
yep,
Like, you can
client obsessed. That's
yeah,
that's
they
the
really are.
name.
Like, it's kind of annoying how obsessed they are sometimes, but it's so true. Yeah, but continue.
Yep.
Sorry.
Yeah, no, it's great, but yeah, they gave me a great opportunity to grow the technical pre-sales team because they actually didn't have one, and they wanted someone to
And you
come
had
in
done
and
it
start
before.
it.
Wow. Okay.
So,
Yeah. Look
so
at
I
you.
saw it as
Yeah.
a really great opportunity to go into management and kind of challenge myself in those areas of, well, I know I've done the job, but can I actually lead a team that's doing the job? And
Sure.
so it was a great opportunity to do that. And so we reconnected from there because I know I started to do some work with you on several
Hmm.
different
Yep.
deals.
Well, yeah. I remember it was what was it? It was the happy return. I forget the call
Yeah, yeah,
specifically, but like going through the happy return. But like, guys, this is how you do it. Like, it's just
but it
right
had
here.
to
Like,
run. It had to run like sub 5 second or whatever.
yeah, and we're like,
It
I don't
was
know if we can even get the executable to run at that point, but like, all right, sure, yeah,
well, by our powers combined, we found some way to get
we
there.
figured something out. Yep,
But
exactly.
yeah, it was pretty awesome. And honestly, from there, my focus started to shift because I was looking at it and I was going, what does the company need the most? Because I've built this kind of skill set, right?
Mhm.
How can I apply that skill set to have the maximum output for the company, right? And that's how I started to think. And that this is one of the benefits of working for a smaller organization, is that there's a little bit more ability to move and apply that. So I could have conversations with upper managers and say, what do you think you're going to need next year, right? Do you need this or do you need this? And when we started to have those conversations, they said, well, we would like a little bit more help with strategic messaging,
Okay.
a little bit more help with content creation. We want to make sure the content we're creating and putting in front of clients is more professional, more accurate, more technically reliable, right? We want someone that's actually built these automations to
Yep.
be the ones that's messaging. And so that was a really cool opportunity. And I would say, in the product marketing space, there's whole avenues that I don't touch, but the ones that I do focus on are probably more in the technical product
Sure.
marketing phase.
Sure.
But it's things like rolling out sales enablement platforms, right? It's making sure everything works and we're able to get the content uploaded, and our sellers are able to find the content that
Yep.
we create easily, because you can create all the content in the world, but if you don't make it easy for your sellers to find it, it's
Hey,
useless.
UiPath, if you're listening, listen to that. We have high spot. It's there, people. Like, sorry, I digress. But
I know.
it's what I'm doing now. Like,
It's a great platform.
it's
We
spot on.
use HighSpot as well.
It's
Yeah,
great. I think I love it. But to your point,
Mhm.
once again, you can have all the best tools in the world. You can have all the collateral in the world. If people don't know how to use it and or find it, you're
Yeah.
waffling, you're struggling, you're throwing stuff at the wall. And what I love about what you did, and I think it's kind of the summary tagline, is you took all of your technical experiences to say, what do people actually need to know? And how do I put myself in the best avenue to make sure people can go find it?
Right. And I think as you move up in an organization, you get opportunities like that, and you can say
Mhm.
yes or no to them.
Sure.
And, I'm sure if I had said no to the product marketing, I'd still probably be helping with the solutions engineering side of the house. But
Sure.
it's an incredible opportunity, I think, to grow your career, because as you're going through that, you're building the baseline skill set that's going to make you valuable or make you a potential great fit for some of these other positions. And I've just really enjoyed the ride. It's been a roller coaster of ups and downs. Not not specifically at Ashling, but just over the course of
Yeah, I mean, yeah, you've held different roles. You've seen
Yeah.
companies go, excel. You've seen it go down. Yeah, like I'm sure there
Mhm.
eventually, when you were doing the SharePoint thing, eventually you saw like, okay, people aren't doing this as much anymore. I got to go figure
Right,
something else out.
right.
Right,
Well,
exactly.
but having that SharePoint background was so helpful, because like on
Right.
day one, I showed up and I built like a ticketing system for my
Right, and they're
team.
like, how did you do that? It's like, well, I remember what I did over here, and I just had to figure something else out, and there you go.
Right,
Yeah,
right. But within a week or two, I was able to put something
right.
together. Then I knew that it would work, and I had a background doing it. So, yeah, I mean, I'm one of the things I've actually asked them over at Ashling to let me do a little bit more of is like to keep certifying in technology, to keep not just taking the training, but actually taking the quizzes and the certifications.
Sure.
Because that's like it's kind of an independent validation that you are still learning all those tools. I think we have a tendency to kind of look at something and be like, oh yeah, I get it. Well, do you really? Because unless you're
Sure. Yeah.
being pushed, it can be, you want to at least have a couple situations come up where you don't know the answer to something and you have
Yep.
to go and figure it out. That's when you learn.
Yeah. Yes.
Which go and figure it out is like the technical pre-sales motto in a way, right?
Just
'Cause
or
if you
just
don't
being
know,
technical in
you
general.
gotta know soon.
Right. Yeah. And I would argue, like, as we're going to summarize here, because I do want to ask you, some
Mhm.
things that you'd want to leave the people with is like, if you're going to break into tech, like being technical doesn't necessarily mean you're a coder. It doesn't necessarily mean you
True.
understand systems analysis like to the T. What it does mean, though, is just like you said it, grit. Like, do you have the building block and the foundation to solve a problem? I do find sometimes that people who are better at like math and science can naturally be more technical because that's kind of problem solving.
Mhm.
But
Mhm.
what you're describing, that's problem solving, right? Like,
Yeah.
okay, I know where to look to go get the answer. I may not be the specialist to go find necessarily the actual solution, but if I know where to go to get it, that's kind of what we're talking about here. And then obviously the more technical you are, the better you're going to be. Like, oh, can you build up this application? Can you go code this thing for me? Whatever it is. But
Sure.
you hit on it. Just kind of round out here.
Mhm.
What are some ways that if people wanted to emulate your career path or follow something similar, what
Mhm.
are some suggestions that you would have? Like, I am you back in 2008.
Wow. I
What
feel
are
sorry
you?
for you?
Yeah, right. Yeah, sorry. But in all that's funny. But in all seriousness, like, what are some things that you would recommend people go take from a certification perspective? What are some things that people could go study on? What are some recommended readings? Like, what would be if you had like 3 things? It doesn't have to be 3 exactly, but like, what are some suggestions that you would give to someone who's trying to break into technology? Because that's the whole moniker of this whole thing. But if they wanted to emulate your path or just get more technical to break into sales, like, what would be your recommendation?
Yeah, that's a great. So
it's a loaded question, I know.
It is. There's so much there. I would say the first thing to do is pick a technology. Pick something that you want to specialize in and you want to be really good at. You don't have to stick with it forever, but carve out your identity around that particular platform. You want to be the best person in your organization for SharePoint, for InfoPath, for K2, for UiPath, whatever it is, right? And you pick that, you build your skill set, and then you start to go and solve problems with it. You seek out people that have problems. So you talk to different departments. They may come to you. They may have a backlog of automations, for example, and say,
sure,
hey,
yeah. I mean, we're just talking automation lens, but sure.
Right. Yeah. And you look at those and you go, well, these ones are, those are projects with teams of developers, but these ones I could probably do for you. Try to be the sole developer on a project. Try to make it so you have to build something yourself, right, with minimal help, right, and that'll put you in a lot of positions where you have to adapt, and it kind of goes into that concept of like a full stack developer, of having to know how the database is constructed, how to know how to put forward an application, and how to make that work over the web. Just putting yourself into those different pressure points, right? Because when you hit that point where you're like, well, I don't know what to do here. Well, that's when you can do some research. That's when you can reach out to people that have done it before and get a little bit of guidance and try to figure out the right way. But through that pursuit of that knowledge, you will learn so much. You will be indispensable to your organization. And then it's up to you. Do you want to go deeper down that rabbit hole and become a true subject matter expert in that technology and dedicate your entire career to it? You can do that, but I would be careful. Just make sure you pick the right type of technology. Make sure you pick like a Microsoft or like a UiPath or a company that's going to be around for a while. Because you don't want to, right? You don't want to pick one and then it's just, it gets purchased and it gets put on a shelf somewhere and then it never goes anywhere, right?
To that point, I would also say like have the foresight and don't get married to it. Like there are times where like sometimes really awesome technologies are created and then when they get bought, it's kind of more of like an intellectual property that gets built into something else. But I would almost argue, like, to your point, I agree with you. But if you do find yourself in that scenario, use that to your advantage, because guess what? You have the expertise that others won't. And you can, just like we've seen here, I've done it in my career, you've done it in yours. How do you take all of the insights that I've learned from like business impact and the perspective and the technology to actually marry that to solving a problem that you're talking about? And sometimes you end up finding a career path out of that you wouldn't even have known.
Yeah, absolutely. And once you're comfortable as a specialist in the technology, start to challenge yourself to build more managerial skills, right? Don't be afraid to present your app to a large group of people. One of the first things that I did, it was just an incredible opportunity and experience, there was a community group, a SharePoint community group that ran out of Northwest Ohio. It was the Toledo user group, I believe. It was ran by a good friend, and she had asked me to present on it. So I came in and I showed the shipping request application on that community session. And it was like my first demo. It really was my first demo when I think back to it. And I had my little note sheet of all the things I wanted to cover. And, I just sat there in front of my laptop and gave the demo. Now, knowing what I know, I would have been up on both feet. Probably.
Yeah, you probably would have had like, I'm going to leave this module up for a while. Yeah, exactly.
I might have had some background music on my demo, something like that. But just challenging yourself, putting yourself out there, not being afraid of falling on your face. And if you do fall on your face, just look back to, well, why did that happen? What stone did I trip over? Was it talking to all those people? Was the level of the people in the room too high? Maybe I need to talk more to developers, and I want to focus my public speaking to developers only versus speaking with upper level managers, right? You can pick and you can control which direction you take, but you're going to build that skill over time. And then from there, the sky really is the limit. If you want to go through something as arduous, I would say, as learning a development skill and specializing, and then maybe even taking it into the real world of technical pre-sales and applying that and selling that to different organizations, there's going to be opportunities abound for you to grow your career, whether you stay in technical pre-sales, which is completely fine. I know some people have been in technical pre-sales for like 20 years and they love it.
They love it.
They love the travel, they love moving around and talking to all the different people and seeing all the different scenarios. But you'll also get opportunities to lead, you'll get opportunities to manage, you'll get opportunities to grow programs or people. And it'll be up to you what you decide you want to go down. And, I think the key is, as long as you have that lifelong learner mentality and you're not afraid to keep learning new skills to stay relevant, you're not afraid to challenge yourself, to overcome your fears, because that's the only way, right, that you're going to develop as a person. I mean, honestly, KJ, I remember meeting you, and I see you now, and I've already seen so much growth just in that.
I have
mean,
too.
it's
But
incredible. You're like running your own show now.
Well, candidly, I'm not. I'm running this show. Aaliyah's the one who got me into this. But no, but you're so right, and I resonate with that so much. Like, I started as kind of the sales engineer, and you're like, okay, that kid's got something. I knew that. But now it's like I've learned how to operationalize it. And you're right. Now I'm in a more managerial role. I have a seat at the table where I'm influencing actual decisions from a strategy perspective. And it all ties back to what you said. I built a specialization. I built a competence, and then I needed to expand that, because I would argue that the best way to confirm what you know is to educate others.
Yeah,
Yeah,
absolutely. And if you don't have all the answers, that's okay. Just make sure you work the hardest of everyone, right? But that's the thing, right? Is like, if you don't know the answers to all the questions that are being asked, just make sure you work harder than anyone else.
Exactly.
Like, that's the grit mentality.
Love it. Well, I think on that note, I think it's a great time to end this. Thank you very much for coming on and just chatting. And honestly, this was an awesome catch up, just to kind of hear your because I actually didn't necessarily know it as intimately as everyone got here, which is pretty awesome. But once again, thank you very much for joining KJ's Corner as part of the Breaking Into Tech series. This has been David Kroll. Would it be okay if people found you on LinkedIn? And
yeah, please. Yeah, I'd love to
so
talk
just
to that.
go to the search bar, David Kroll, Ashling Partners. It'll pop up. You will see the tagline that pops up: product marketing, sales engineering, and enablement, and /UiPath MVP. That is
there.
Awesome.
You go.
Once again, thank you so much, David. This has been awesome. I am KJ with KJ's Corner, and we will see y'all next time. Cheers, guys.
KJ, it was a pleasure. Take care. Bye, everyone.